What started out as a romantic camping trip ended in horror for a young couple in California, the year 1988. The location, Lake Oswego, close to Crescent City in California. Hi everyone, welcome to another true crime story. My name is Kimbyrleigha, and today we're going to be talking about a very sad and heartbreaking story of a young couple in California. Doug and Rozina Anderson were newlyweds. It was 1988 and Rozina was 31 and Doug was only 28 years old. They had just gotten married and moved in together and they were extremely happy. They had so many plans for their lives and Rozina was just the sweetest, most kind person. No one had anything bad to say about either one of these individuals. They wanted to do something special for the summer, so they decided to take a road trip. A neighbor said that they asked him to watch their house and he obliged, and they gave him the keys right before they left for their trip. And everything seemed completely normal. They said they're probably going to be 5 days and then return, and everything was fine. They were super excited. On the road trip, they were laughing, they were enjoying music, and they were just having a great time. They had one of those vans that's really good for a trip like this because it has a bed in the back and it's really, really cozy. And it even had that little window on the top where you could watch, the stars at night. It kind of like pops up. So they had everything planned to have a nice trip, and they wanted to go to an area which had a lake, and they ended up near Lake Oswego, and this is close to Crescent City in California. They were both really talented artists, and Rozina spent a lot of her time in the basement of their house creating all of these really beautiful canvas paintings. Doug actually owned his own sign company. Rozina's brother Dave described his sister as being deeply in love with her husband, being really outgoing, and that people just loved being around her. The couple planned to have children in the future, and they were so excited about that. So Rozina and Doug left for their camping trip, and they shared a genuine love for the outdoors. So they decided to set up their camp at a place called Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park. The thing I want you to note, though, is that instead of going to the campground, they actually just found a little road off the beaten path where they could be alone, and possibly that was for romantic reasons, but they did not go to the campsite, which really bothered me when I was reading about the story, because I always think of what could have happened had they not made one simple choice. So Rozina kept a diary. And for this trip, she actually had a special travel diary. And the entire time, she had been writing in it, talking about everything that they were doing that day. They had gone by the lake. They had started their own fire. They were enjoying nature together. They took a little swim. They roasted marshmallows. And overall, they were just having a really good time as a couple. But her last entry was on August 15th. The entry seemed to be incomplete. All it said was that Doug and I both did some fishing, but after that, the diary goes completely blank. Relatives actually didn't realize that the couple was even missing at first, until Rozina's job called. She worked at Sears, and on August 19th, they called saying that Rozina had not returned to work. This really raised the alarm, as it should, and Rozina's family quickly contacted the police, and the search for the couple began. Only 3 days later, Doug and Rozina's bodies were discovered. They were in their van, which was on a scenic loop through Jedediah Smith State Park. A tourist had actually been camping nearby, and then she ended up stumbling upon the gruesome scene. The first thing she noticed when she walked up, and what caught her attention, was that there was a tiny black Cocker Spaniel that was tied up to their 1974 Dodge van. When the woman got closer to the van to check if the dog was all right, she noticed that the passenger side window was completely broken, and she unfortunately smelled a really foul odor coming from inside the vehicle. Both Rozina and Doug had been shot several times. The sheriff's office that was nearby and investigating the murders said that the Andersons had died from multiple gunshot wounds from a .22 caliber weapon. At least 9 shell casings were found inside the couple's van. At first, the sheriffs thought this might have been a robbery, but that was quickly ruled out as the motive because Rozina and Doug's wallets and jewelry were actually found inside the van. The couple had actually been discovered about a week after they think the murders occurred. The medical examiner concluded that the bodies had been there for about a week before they were found. So the trail of their murderer had gone very cold. And then the whole case went cold. However, this was an area that a lot of tourists would visit, so it wasn't unusual for someone to come through the area and then go back to where they came from. While the couple's cause of death was easily established, the motive behind why a person did this was still a mystery. The couple's families would have to wait 27 years to have all their questions answered and find out what really happened to their loved ones. In 2012, another cold case was being investigated by the San Mateo County Crime Lab. They had been examining a DNA sample in hopes of finally solving the 1986 rape and murder of Annette Thurer. Annette was only 17 years old when her body was found dumped in a local ravine. The DNA sample led police to 52-year-old John William Kelly, a convicted rapist. On December 6, 1986, after attending a party in Boulder Creek, Annette wanted to hitchhike her way back home. She was picked up by the then only 23-year-old married man, John, early that morning. Again, I always think if something had been different, possibly this wouldn't happen. And I know hitchhiking used to be the norm, and I'm so glad it's not. I understand people don't have a way to get around, but it is so scary getting in a car, which you might not be able to get out of easily, with someone you do not know. John then took Annette to his house, where he ended up doing some very terrible things to her. She was raped, sodomized, and she was finally strangled to death. Annette's body was later found in a ravine in the neighboring San Mateo County by a tourist who stopped to admire the scenery nearby. At first, the police thought that Annette had died from a cocaine overdose, and that possibly her friends had dumped her there because they did not want to be responsible or connected with what happened to her. But that theory was later ruled out. But after a lack of leads in the case and no viable suspects, the case went cold. Thankfully for this case and many other cold cases, the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office preserved the evidence from the crime. And because of the advancements in DNA technology, eventually they would find Annette's killer and get justice. It wasn't until 2012, after being granted $217,000 worth of funds by federal agents, that the crime lab in San Mateo County was able to run the DNA. They ran it through CODIS, and the DNA matched with John Kelly. Back in May of 1995, John had actually already pleaded guilty to rape of one of his acquaintances, and he offered her a ride to Eureka, California. And when doing so, he pretty much did the exact same thing to her. Instead of taking her home, John took her to his own home and had his way with her. And to investigators, this sounded a lot like what happened to Annette, but unfortunately, she did not walk away alive. After they got the DNA hit, the agents were dispatched to interview John. And in the end, he was arrested and charged with the murder of Annette. You might be thinking, what happened to Doug and Rozina, and why are we talking about an entirely different case? But here's the thing. John eventually decided to plead no contest to the charges against him in connection with Annette, but he was still sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His sentencing took place a few days after the 29th anniversary of Annette's death, and right afterward, to everyone's surprise, John ended up confessing to investigators that he had killed 2 other people. He said that he needed to clear his conscience. He confessed to the murders of Doug and Rozina Anderson. The investigators knew that he was telling the truth because John had known specific details about the crime that no one had ever released to the public. It was definitely clear at this point that the information he had was from firsthand knowledge. However, he was only willing to confess if the death sentence was taken off the table. That's when John's lawyer reached out to Rozina and Doug's family members and discussed this with them before entering into agreement. I've heard this many times before, so I guess they have the authority to decide whether or not to pursue the death penalty or life imprisonment. But the family actually agreed, and they decided to eliminate the death penalty so that they could know what happened to their loved ones. And I understand that as well, and it's probably what I would do. So now I want to tell you the story of what actually happened to the couple in those woods. And this is where I have a hard time with this one because, like I said, it's really hard for me to discuss cases like this where you have these amazing people. They didn't do anything wrong. They're completely innocent. And they're just at the completely wrong place at the wrong time. But after they went fishing that day and were eating dinner, it was getting dark. So Doug and Rozina decided to go back to their van. This is when they got back into the van. And like I said, they had a bed in the back. So they got cozy and they went to sleep. In the middle of the night, they started to hear a noise outside of the van. And this is terrifying to me because you have nothing. Something that had happened on their way out of town was that Doug brought a gun with them. Rozina did not like this. She didn't think they needed one. She was definitely opposed to having a weapon like that. But somehow Doug thought that it was the best idea because they were going to be alone. And with those good intentions, he took the gun and put it underneath the driver's seat of their van. All the while knowing that this weapon was there and that this still occurred just really makes me cringe. It's just really unfortunate. They could have never predicted what would happen next, but John Kelly was the man outside the van. He started banging on all the windows, on the doors, and a part of me thinks that possibly he was trying to scare them. They're alone in the woods, but he was actually watching them. He was watching them all day long, and Rozina was very beautiful. He couldn't resist the urge to have his way with her, and that is really where this began. After stalking them and watching them all day, he decided to make his move. This part is sad. Like I know this is not like my usual video in some ways because honestly, it almost brings me to tears. And I'm not even a sensitive person. I'm usually very nonchalant about telling these stories, but this just terrifies me and it's just so wrong. But Doug, of course, is trying to protect Rozina. So he opens the door and he tries to reason with John, and he's saying everything he possibly can. He says, take my wallet, take the van, take anything you want. It's yours. Just please don't hurt us. And this man is completely begging for his life at this point and the life of the woman that he absolutely loves. John tells Doug to strip down naked outside of the van. And the reason for this is to disarm him and, of course, humiliate him and make it harder for him to overpower him. If you're feeling weak and you're in that position where you're not covered and you have nothing, it's going to be much easier for someone to harm you. And after pleading with John to please spare his life and Rozina crying hysterically, John shot him 3 times. Rozina had to watch all of this. She had to watch his body just fall down limp and realize that she was completely not safe and that the same thing was most likely going to happen to her. She did make a run for it, and she was so close to grabbing the gun. She ran to the driver's side of the van, and she opened the door, and she grabbed the gun, and she had the gun in her hands, pointed at John. And for whatever reason, she could not pull the trigger. And I understand, she's not a murderer, she's not a killer. She's a sweet, loving individual who loves nature. She's an artist, she's gentle, and she just didn't have it in her. So of course, John was able to overpower her, take the gun away, and he had his way with her in the van. He almost had second thoughts about killing her. She was really good at talking him down. He seemed like he was going to let her go. He even kind of toyed with it and asked her things like, "Why should I let you go?" And still she pleaded for her life and he shot her. After this, he just fled the scene. Rozina's brother Dave asked, through John's lawyer, about the motives. Why did John do this? I understand wanting to have his way with Rozina, but why kill this couple? Why do this? And this is something that bothers me so bad. If all of this doesn't bother me enough, John said that he was simply in a bad mood and that he took his rage out on them. That is not an appropriate reason to hurt another person. So even though knowing what happened to Rozina and Doug did bring closure to their family. They just could not believe that this happened because John was just blowing off some steam that day. John Kelly was later convicted again and sentenced to 2 more life imprisonment terms for the murder of Doug and Rozina. And this right here is the California Correctional Institution that he is housed in right now. I'm sorry if this was a difficult one to hear. It was for me to tell, but like always, if you enjoyed in some way hearing this true crime story, don't forget to subscribe and even hit the notification bell so you don't miss another one of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any cases that you would like me to cover, please look in the description box. I do have a link there where you can suggest a case. All right, until next time, bye.